Okay guys, so welcome back to part 3. Now, just to recap where we left off, we had the cylinder heads fitted with the new head gasket, and we've had the camshafts put in and bolted down. Our next step is to go down to the timing side and get everything lined up and the timing chain back on. Okay, so here we are. The new head gasket has been fitted, the cylinder head, which has been cleaned and skimmed, put back on. Both the inlet and the exhaust camshaft have been put back on and also bolted down in the correct order. Now that we are done up top, we now need to move to the timing side, where we now need to get everything all into the correct position for the timing chain, the guides and the tensioner to be put on. Okay, so if you remember when we were putting the camshafts on, we wanted to just manually get them to a position as close as possible to where they need to be. So if you remember the recessed slits in the back of each camshaft, they have to be sat at the higher point, being horizontal. So this one we are pretty close, as we are with the inlet one as well. Now, to ensure that I'm going to be having them at the correct position, I did pre-mark the camshafts before taking everything apart. I don't know if you can just see there's a little mark just in front of the tooth there, and another one just in front of that tooth just there. I also have corresponding links on the timing chain which marry up to that, so I can put the chain on in exactly the same position before I took it off. Coming down to the crankshaft side, however, now if you remember from when we were putting the cylinder head on, I actually put all the pistons all on the same level, so I backed off the crank about 1/4 of a revolution. So I'm now going to turn it back round to ensure that the webbing on the crankshaft sits up against the locking pin. Okay, there we are. Now I know where cylinder number 1 is at top dead center. Now we can move back up to the cams and get them in a close enough position for when we get the chain on. Okay, so here's the timing chain that I'm going to put back on. Now, before I took everything off, I marked up the links where the teeth that I have pre-marked on the VVTs line up perfectly, so I know exactly where they went. I also made a mark on the bottom one where it sits on the crank sprocket. So I'm just going to pop this in loosely, as close as possible to it now. Okay, so when it comes to timing, it's incredibly important that we have all the mechanically moving components in sync with each other. Otherwise, we're going to have running issues and check engine lights come on, potential misfires, and God forbid we might have piston to valve contact. But to avoid this, there are special tools. So we have the crank locked off against the locking pin, so we know the crankshaft is in the correct position. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the locking tool that slots into the back of the intake camshaft and the exhaust camshaft. It's one whole piece. It's like a backwards L shape, which locates and sets both of them. There even is a small screw that screws into that to hold it all in place. However, I do have a flat plate for Ford Fiestas with the 1.6 VVT engines, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to lock off the intake camshaft, and because I've marked where the links on the chains are to each sprockets on the camshaft, I'm going to rely on the chain holding the exhaust camshaft in the correct place as I get it all timed up with the bottom. So I'm going to do that now, and then I'll show you exactly what I've done. Then this is the tensioner that keeps the tension on the timing chain. Now you do need to reset this. You have to put this in a clamp and push the plunger all the way back in. You have to get a small pick in this hole here to push back this plastic lock. And then once it's all fully depressed like it is now, you need a small pin to go into the hole at the back to hold it all in place. Now there is a strong spring in there. If that pin wasn't in there, that would just spring all the way out and you wouldn't be able to actually install it behind the timing chain guide. So as it is, it's fully depressed. I'll get it bolted behind the timing chain guide, and then we're going to get everything into position to make sure everything is timed up correctly. Okay, here we are. I have got everything all lined up and timed up. So just to reiterate, I don't know if you can just see it, there is a small mark on the top of the VVT there which lines up with the tooth in between the two links, so I know that is in the correct position. I've got my own mark on top of the VVT in front of the tooth in between the two links, so I know that in relation to the camshafts, they are in time with one another. Now, my original mark down on the chain and sprocket here, that has lined up perfectly as well, and just confirming that the web is up against the pin for the crankshaft. Now, word of warning, the crankshaft, which is this bit just here, well, the crankshaft's inside, but this is the end of it. This does rotate independently to the sprocket, which the chain goes round, which drives the camshafts as well as the oil pump. Now, the oil pump isn't timed, so we don't have to worry about the position of that, but because the crankshaft, without the crank pulley clamping everything together, the crankshaft will rotate freely to this sprocket and therefore potentially be out of time with the camshafts. This is why we have the camshafts locked up at the top, which I'll show you now. And here we are. So this is the locking plate, and as you can see, that slots in there really nicely. So there is nice and free play, it's in its perfect position, and it will stop it from going anywhere. Now, because I know the chains are in exactly the same position, if you look at the back of the exhaust camshaft load now, that is pretty much, well, that is bang on horizontal, so I'm more than happy with that. In an ideal world, I would like to have the actual locking tool, but I don't have it. In hindsight, I'll probably get one, but as far as I'm concerned here, the cams are in the correct position, the tool confirms it, especially for the inlet. The crankshaft is in the correct position because the webbing is up against the locking pin. So, because all the chain and everything is on now, all I want to do is go down to the tensioner, pull that pin so that the chain will then be under its own sprung load tension until we can get it started and get additional oil pressure behind it as well. So, let's pull the pin. These pins are always tight. That just shows how much tension is behind it. It's very close, and there we go. So you probably heard that loud pop. That was just the spring pushing the plunger out and putting constant tension on the chain guide and therefore the chain. So what we're going to do now that the chain's on, the tensioner is doing its thing for the time being, I'm going to go back around to make sure that all my marks are lined up, the webbing is still in the correct position, to ensure that I've 100% got all of this timed up correctly. So the good news is everything is all timed up. I'm going to leave that locking plate and the locking pin on the web in place because now we need to install the timing chain front cover and then get the crankshaft pulley on so that it can clamp the sprocket to the crankshaft. I know it's an insane design, and then once that crank pulley is on, that will hold all the timing system in place and the engine will run bang on. Okay, so just to show you what I've done now, this is the timing cover that is in place. Now, I've just done a very quick dry run, purely because whenever you're putting a metal timing cover on, if they don't come with gaskets, you have to put sealant around the edges. Now, because it's really tight space getting the cover in and out, the last thing I want to do is, once I've cleaned everything up, put the new sealant all in place, is then rub the fresh sealant on any parts that may compromise the seal. So I've just put this in place to make sure I know the best position to get the timing cover in without scraping any of the fresh sealant off. But also, I did make some additional marks on the timing cover, being a fixed position just there, in correlation to where the camshafts are, and that lines up. Let's just get that timing cover back in place. And there is another one just there, which lines up with the one on top. So it just reconfirms that when I originally took everything apart, these were the original positions when the crankshaft was up against the webbing. So now what I'm going to do, just give the mating faces of the timing cover to the head and the block a nice clean to make sure they are dry and contaminant free, and then I'm going to get the sealant on the timing cover, fitted, and then everything torqued up to specification. But to help the situation, this is the timing cover, and you do actually have 1, 2 dowels, that's helped to locate the timing cover perfectly in place. Now when you're taking all this apart and before putting it back on, make sure that these are there, because if this cover is in any awkward position, then the crankshaft seal won't seal properly and you're going to have an oil leak. Okay, so there we are, the timing cover is all done. I managed to get the timing cover in without disturbing any of the seal. There is a tightening sequence order. Basically all the small 8mm are 10 Newton meters, and you kind of have to work in a crisscross action going up and then down. Once you've got all those, there's these 3 13s up here which are 48 Newton meters, a random 13 bolt which is down there, that's 48 Newton meters as well, and then you've got a random 10mm just there which is 25 Newton meters. So once that is all done, that can now set over the next 24 hours, but that doesn't stop us from moving on. Okay, so the timing cover is now done. Now we're back down here in the wheel well, purely because we now need to put the crankshaft pulley on. Now very, very important, when you're taking this off, there is actually a friction washer which undoubtedly needs to go back on. This is what's going to help seal the back of the crank pulley to the oil and the camshaft sprocket to the crankshaft, and this is all it takes to help actually get it to fit on there properly and not slip, because remember the sprocket is completely independent to the crankshaft. It's not splined on there at all, so everything still has to remain timed up whilst we put this on. Now there is actually one more pin that will actually keep the pulley on there locked up, because just to make things even easier, the crank pulley acts as a pickup for the crankshaft position sensor to tell the computer exactly where the engine is in regards to revolution, so it knows its firing order. So you have to follow these steps very, very precisely, because one fraction of a tooth, half a tooth out, anything like that is going to cause all kind of issues, and you'll have to tear everything apart to do it all over again. So let's get down to it now, get everything fitted, and I'll show you exactly how to tighten it up. Okay, here we are at the bottom side of the engine. So first of all, one friction washer goes on first, so that just slides over, and be very careful, it's very thin. Okay, and that will just sit there. Secondly, the crank pulley will now go on. So I'm going to draw your attention to 2 things. As you can probably see, around the edge there's lots of teeth, and there's even 2 teeth missing. Now this actually represents a certain revolution of the engine. Now there'll be a sensor that I'll show you later that sits on there. It's a Hall effect sensor, and when it finds the gap in the tooth, it knows exactly where the engine is in regards to its revolution and what cylinder to fire. So that's why we have to be careful, but the good news is we do have a locating hole there which goes through and screws into the bottom of the timing cover to hold that in place whilst we lock everything up. So the next thing to do is just to slide this on. My recommendation is to get a little bit of fresh oil and just lubricate inside there or on the spindle part of the crankshaft there. Now I've already done that. Now this came off very easily, so I presume it's going to slide on just as easy. There we are. And you want to rotate that round until that hole lines up. Now in the manual it actually says to use a 5mm drill bit, believe it or not, to put through there, but I do know that the hole in the timing cover is actually threaded, so you actually need a 10 by 1.5 bolt, and it will slide through the hole of the crank pulley, actually screw into the timing cover itself. You only need to do this by hand. It should be nice and easy. When it stops by finger pressure, leave it, that's fine. And I did actually make a mark. You can probably just see it there, just underneath the A chiseled into the timing cover. There is a small little dent above the last tooth before the gap. So I know that this crank pulley is now perfectly in the correct position, and that thread is going, or that bolt even, is going to hold it in. So now we can put the crank pulley bolt in, and it's always recommended to use a new bolt. You just want to get that started by hand until it nips up. Okay, so we're double checking everything again. So the bolt is in by hand. We have the timing bolt to locate the crank pulley because it needs to be positioned. We know that the webbing of the crank inside the engine now is up against the locking pin, which is still in, and we have the plate in the cam up top holding the cam. So now we can go ahead and tighten this crank pulley bolt. So the tightening torque for this crank pulley bolt is in 2 stages. Stage number 1 is 100 Newton meters. Stage number 2 is 90 degrees. Okay, so there is my 100 Newton meters. Now, because I don't have a digital torque wrench on me, like I did with the head bolts, I'm going to mark at 12 o'clock on the bolt with some Tipex. And now I want to go 90 degrees, so when it gets to 3 o'clock, I know that that crank pulley bolt is as tight as it needs to be. Right then, there we go. I am more than happy with that. That has got 90 degrees. So now I'm going to remove all of the locking pins. So the pin out the back of the cam, the plate out the back of the camshafts, and then I'm going to turn the engine over to ensure that all the timing marks realign in their original position. Okay, first of all, the crankshaft pin. And this should all still just be finger tight, which it is, and that's come out perfectly. And then we just want to put this to one side, and the plate on the back of the cam is still nice and loose and in position, and so is the exhaust camshaft as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the engine over. Now the crankshaft will rotate twice to 1 revolution of the camshafts. So we have to turn the crank over twice, which is 2 times 360 degrees, 2 full revolutions, 720 degrees. So I'm going to do that now, and you'll notice the camshafts will be moving, and then once I'm just before top dead center, I'm going to pop that locking pin in the crank, put the webbing up to the crank, and then recheck the timing marks. Okay, here we go, 2 full revolutions. Okay, so that's 1 full revolution for the crank, and we'll now do the second one. Now it's really easy because the spark plugs are removed, so that is just before top dead center. I'm going to go ahead and pop the locking pin in the back of the block. Okay, there it is, that's in. So I'm now going to turn the crank up against the webbing, which it is. First things first, the small little threaded bolt is located into the timing cover perfectly. And now up at the top, the moment of truth, there we go, look at that, perfect. That is 100% all timed up, all locked off, and everything all tightened to the correct specification. So from here onwards, we are now going to go ahead and put the cam cover on. We're going to get this all covered up, and then once we've done that, I'll then be going ahead and putting everything back together. Okay, so now we're moving on to the valve cover, which is what you can see here. Now I do have a new kit for a seal, because basically there is 1 big seal that runs across the outside and then 4 seals that run along the inside. Now they are shaped and it will only go one way, and you do actually have a tiny little rubber tab that will locate in this part of the valve cover, and then you just want to gently seat everything into place, just like so. You then just want to run your finger down and just lightly push everything into its recess. It will only go in halfway, and then once you've got it all located, that will be ready to put on. So that's the outside one. We've got one for the inside here. Well, actually, we've got 4 for the inside here. And again, you've got little tabs to locate. And that one goes in there. And these are the seals that surround the spark plug bores and stop oil leaking down into your spark plugs, because I have seen before that will create potential misfires and foul up your spark plugs. Plus you'll lose oil, which is never good. There we are. And that is now all set to go. So there's one more thing I just need to do. There is a small bit of silicone I need to add to the top of the cylinder head. It will go roughly about here, where you can see these slightly widened blocks of rubber. That is to ensure a perfect seal where the timing cover meets the cylinder head, and obviously then the rocker valve cover will then go on top and meet the 2 joining metal parts. It's just to ensure a perfect seal. Okay, so this is where you need to put fresh sealant. Now, you can see just here in front of my finger, and on the opposite side as well, that is where the top of the timing cover meets the cylinder head, and it's pushed out a little bit of sealant from where we sealed it earlier. Now, the best thing to do is, at this point, it's probably still a little bit wet enough just to kind of take it off with your finger. You kind of want to give it a clean up so we can put some fresh sealant on there. Okay, so I've just got some fresh sealant, and you don't need much. Technically, it's about 5 mil of sealant just to run across that joining point. There we are, on that side as well. Now, one thing I'd recommend to do, just get a fresh bit of oil and just lube up around both of the bodies of the VVT valves, so that when you place everything on top, they should slide on there. Yeah, there we go, already good there, really nicely. Okay, and working from the inside bolts, circular motion working your way outwards, it's 10 Newton meters all round. Okay, so here is the last bit of very important information. Here is the crank position sensor. Now, this is the Hall effect sensor, which picks up on the teeth on the back of the crank pulley. Now, this does just bolt straight onto the timing cover, just like so. However, you'll notice it's got elongated holes, so it can actually move slightly left and right. Now, there is, unfortunately, a special tool which puts this into a very specific position. Unfortunately, I do not have that. In my experience, as long as this is pretty much in the middle of the bolt holes, then it's going to be absolutely fine. So I'm going to put this in a position where it is equal between both bolts, and then just knit them up. I think it's only 8 Newton meters, nothing too tight at all. And then once that's in position, I'm then going to go up top and start putting everything back together off camera, and then bring you back once everything is done, or I have some very specific information you need to know. Okay, so as you can see, I've made quite a fair bit of progress. It's literally just been the case of fitting everything in reverse order. One important little bit, I'm now at the point where I need to put the fuel pump housing onto the back of the cylinder head. Now, this is the back of the cam cap, the one that we had to put some sealant in to stop it from leaking oil. Now, there is a seal on the fuel pump housing, which is here. This is the fuel pump housing, and that is the seal that ensures that no oil can leak out of there. So we have to make sure that this surface is nice and clean, which does mean we have to shave off a little bit of that dry sealant. Now, you can just get a sharp edge like a razor blade and just very slowly take that bit off at the front and at the back. As long as you're careful and leave it nice and flush, then the seal on the housing is going to seal perfectly. Now, unfortunately, there was a very, very long wait time. I was literally looking at a couple of weeks to get a new seal for this housing, so I'm hoping that is going to seal okay. It is looking a little bit flush, more than I expected, but fingers crossed. If it does leak, it's not the worst thing in the world to replace. I'm going to ensure a very clean surface and then start bolting that together. And then when it comes to putting the actual fuel pump and plunger back on, I'll bring you back because there's another important step you need to take. Okay, so that's the high pressure fuel pump housing bolted onto the cylinder head. Now the next thing I want to show you is assembling the high pressure pump. Now if you look down here, you can see the square cam lobe at the back, which actually, as it rotates, it pushes on a bucket, which is this, and there is a roller that it sits on, and the camshaft, as it rotates, it pushes this bucket up and down, and is that motion which then pushes on the plunger on the high pressure side, which generates the high pressure for the fuel system. So you need to get this nice and clean before we put it back in. When you do put it back in, there's two things we need to do. We actually need to rotate the engine so that the flattest part of the square lobe is at its lowest point, so the bucket can sit at its lowest point, because when it comes to fitting the high pressure pump, it would actually allow you to have it sat flush to tighten up. If it's under tension, it's going to be incredibly tight to push down, and you don't want to potentially damage anything. The other thing is that when we're fitting the bucket, there is very importantly a locating tab on one side, which is to locate into a groove that's inside the housings. So the groove there is towards 6 o'clock as I'm looking at it, and you just want to put that down in there. Now what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of oil around here to keep it nice and lubricated, and then all I'm going to do once it's lubricated is just slide that down into there until it hits the top of the lobe. So I'm going to turn the engine over and then put the bucket in. I only need to go a fraction of the way. I'm trying to do this one-handed, so hopefully you can see it. There we go. All right, that is now flat with the bottom of the housing. So now I can put the bucket in, let that slide down, and then install the high pressure pump. So now we can go ahead and get the rest of the fuel line connected. So the engine is all back together now. I'm just about to fill out the coolant reservoir, but what I have done is I've left the connectors to the spark plugs, or the coil packs even, off. I want to turn the engine over, but I don't want it to fire. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I want the oil pressure to build up, and I want to pump oil around the engine before actually firing it. It's just a way of lubricating everything efficiently before the engine actually runs. Once I've cranked it over for, I don't know, maybe 20-30 seconds maximum, I'll then re-plug the coil packs in, and then we'll actually go and fire her up. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm now going to go ahead and pop the coil packs back on, and as long as I've built up enough fuel pressure as well, she should fire with no problems. Okay, and there we are. As you can see, the engine fired up and it is all settled out and running absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and fill up the coolant reservoir before it starts getting warm, get that circulated, get the engine up to operating temperature, and then start putting everything away. If you guys have learned a little something, enjoyed the video, by all means, like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. So on that note, from me, Adam at Green Auto Services, thank you ever so much for watching, and we'll see you guys, of course, in the next video.